In 1925, a young Russian filmmaker named Sergei Eisenstein made an epic silent film called Battleship Potemkin. It was a dramatization of the true story of an actual Russian battleship, which, in 1905, became the subject of a mutiny and an important event of the First Russian Revolution. The film could have easily been a boring historical document, or worse, a flag-waving piece of Soviet propaganda, which in some ways it was designed to be. But somehow, in spite of all intentions, it wound up becoming one of the greatest films of all time.
I am New York City's zero-budget guerrilla filmmaker Sean Weathers.
And I'm Canadian screenwriter and playwright Angus Combe. And for the next 70 minutes, we'll be guiding you through Sergei Eisenstein's critically acclaimed and incredibly influential silent masterpiece, Battleship Potemkin. The No Rules Film School is now in session.
So we are watching, we watched the restored version, and we're watching that now as we do the commentary. But for YouTube, since I think this is kind of public domain, or there are copies on YouTube, we're going to be playing the original version, the unrestored version, I should say. But I just say that to say, this is worth seeking out a restored version. It just looks so much cleaner and better. I sometimes post public domain movies on my channel, and I remember I did that for Blonde Ice, and I accidentally posted the restored version, which is copyrighted. Restored versions are copyrighted, and I spoke to the copyright holder. We went back and forth a little bit, and yeah, I told him, yeah, listen, I'll pull it. I'll put the older version on. But I just had like a firsthand experience of watching the two versions, and people on my channel that, come for those type of movies, commented, hey, like, what happened to the other version? I can't even see this thing. So it is well worth seeing restored versions of older movies whenever you can, especially in this situation when we're talking about a great classic film. But sometimes, like, it's great to watch the free stuff on YouTube, and by all means go to my channel if you want to do that. But I would say when you can watch a restored version, it's well worth the experience, because it's just night and day what they can do. And remember, the guy told me it was only 11 grand. He made it seem like, dude, I spent 11 grand for this. Like, I can't have people pirating my movies. And I was like, listen, I empathize. I'm a zero budget filmmaker myself. People pirate my movies, and I spend less than 11 grand, and I'm outraged when I get pirated. But in the great scheme of things, like restoring a movie, I'm not sure like the cost of restoring this versus the cost of restoring Blonde Ice, but $11,000 is a well worth investment to restore these movies. Like, I think all of these movies should be restored if they're anywhere within that price range, because the difference in quality is just night and day.
Yeah, totally. And I know that there is a YouTube channel for the company that actually produced this film, the big Russian filmmaking company. I think they're called MOS Film or MOS Film, something like that. And they have really nice versions up of all this type of stuff. So yeah, you can definitely find a nice version there, and probably many others as well. But yeah, if you can see a restored version, it's always worth it. I know I own some videotapes that are not restored versions, and then when I accidentally watch it on TV and it's much better, I always think, why do I have this videotape? This is just not good. It's not the same.
Videotape? What is that?
You remember videotape, the stuff we used to rent back in the day, 80s, 90s.
What are you talking about? I'm a young whippersnapper.
Not together, but I'm sure you went to a video store at some point in your
I'm referring to age, not
age.
Not
yeah.
us. I'm just referring to age, old man.
Yes, that's right.
But starting next week, we're going to be going back to videos so you guys can see what we look like and see our annoying faces in the side of the screen as we watch these movies together.
Yes, see the young man and the old man talking movies.
Now they're gonna realize that there isn't that much of an age gap here. So I can only keep up this facade for so long.
Yes, well, enjoy it while you can, I guess.
Yeah. So this movie, it's just amazing. I remember, so when I first watched this, it was at the time when I was consuming a lot of movies, and I was specifically watching a lot of silent films. And I may have seen it twice because I know Sergei Eisenstein, I think that's how you pronounce his name, or Eisenstein,
Uh,
it was
Eisenstein, I would say, but
Eisenstein.
we have disagreements on pronunciation from time to time. So who knows?
Listen, whatever's right, I'm in the corner of right, and you
Okay.
choose to be in the corner of wrong. So let's just call him Sergey, since we can both agree on that's how
Yes.
you pronounce his first name, right?
Sergei. Yes,
So
indeed.
Sergey, when I was studying film and learning about films, I was watching films by errors and also by filmmakers. And Sergey was someone that I loved his films, and I may have watched it when I was watching his films, and I may have watched this when I was watching silent films. But either way, it's been a long time since I've watched it. And I remember certain bullet points from the film. Like I remember, oh, the stair scenes, the
Hmm.
Odessa stair scenes. And I was like, oh yeah, that's where the Untouchables got that from. And when I
Hmm.
say that, I'm saying, oh, the Untouchables. And this is a classic film, and The Untouchables is but The Untouchables is a classic film at this point because we're talking
Yes.
about old and older. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of people weren't even born when The Untouchables came out. But yeah, so yeah, I was like, man, and the red flag on the boat. I think there was
Hmm.
a short film called The Red Balloon that used that, and I
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
know Spielberg used it for uh the help me um the
Schindler's List.
Schindler's List. If you
Yes.
know the movie, why are you letting me just like dangle out here while
Well,
you
I'm
just
not.
like
I
you know
got to give you
sitting
a
there?
chance.
You just want to see me dangle in the wind
Well,
just because I made those age
you,
jokes.
you said Spielberg. It could have been 1941. I wasn't sure. I had to think about it.
1941 didn't have black and white and red in it, did it?
I can't remember. Um,
Nobody can. Nobody saw that movie.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
regardless, but there were elements of this movie that you saw specifically used in other movies. But overall, the reason Sergei is such an important filmmaker today is because he was kind of like the at least known as, whether he was or he wasn't officially, as like the innovator of montage filmmaking. And that was kind of why I got into his films and why I love this one. And I would say this is one of the better silent films ever made. Leaving quality and story and plots and significance, all of that aside, I think this film works as a silent film because dialogue really isn't necessary. You
Hmm.
sometimes you look at silent films, it's like, oh, you got to read these word bubbles on what the characters are saying. These word bubbles just surmise what's happening.
Hmm.
Oh, well, this is when this happened, and this is when that happened, and this is where we're at now, and this is this segment. It isn't, you're just not like seeing characters pantomime words, and then you cut to the word bubble and we see what they're saying. Those type of silent movies, I don't think age at all. But these kind of
Wow.
age pretty well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think people have a wrong idea, people who haven't watched a lot of silent films. And I was in the same boat too when I was young. I thought that there was a lot of speech bubbles or title cards that were put up. And sometimes you could see people do sort of a spoof of a silent film, and they would have all kinds of, dialogue cards up. But when you watch a good movie like this, a good silent film, there's almost none. There's very, very little because they tell the story visually. They don't rely on dialogue in the same way as sound films. So a really good silent film, I think, is really silent in a way.
Yeah, and by no means am I saying that there aren't great silent films that use word bubbles. I'm just
Hmm.
saying that a movie like this that doesn't require a lot of dialogue, character development, there really isn't a lot of particular characters you're following. It's just a story. I'm just saying these age better and they're more
Yes.
conducive for a more contemporary audience to consume, without, being feeling like, all right, this I'm too uncomfortable. This isn't something I'm prepared for. This is something I'm interested in. This is more digestible for a more contemporary audience or younger
Yeah.
viewers to start with if you're going to watch a silent film, are silent films like these that more so follow events and give you an overview and don't really get into specific characters and plots and stories. It's just more so like this overarching story, almost historical event that you're just watching, almost like you're just watching like footage, like documentary footage or like wartime footage or something like that, where this is actually real, where you wouldn't be able to hear them people talking. It's just like, film shot without sound type thing. So yeah, from that standpoint, I think this ages really well, and leaving the aging part out of it, I just think it's a great film.
Yeah, totally. And this is a movie that has been considered one of the greatest movies ever made for a long, long time. I think the first time that they ever did a poll was for Expo 58, the 1958 Brussels World's Fair, where they polled a bunch of critics from all over the world, 117 critics from 26 different countries, and they all voted on the greatest films of all time. And they developed a list of 12 films that they thought were sort of in the running. And Battleship Potemkin was number one on that list. It received the most votes, 100 votes. So most of the critics felt that it was possibly the greatest film ever made. And that was, in the 50s. That was quite a while after this film was made. So even though it is very old, I mean, it was old then, and movies were no longer silent, of course. And so even so, it was still considered to be perhaps the greatest film ever made. And that kind of just continued on, like Sight and Sound magazine, they do their polls every 10 years, greatest films ever made. And, this movie was on the list the very first time. I think it was the fourth greatest film, according to Sight and Sound, or according to the critics who were polled. And then every 10 years, it was on that top 10 list for the next 5 polls for 50 years. And then it finally dropped to number 11, which is still really good. And for some reason, it's dropped to number 54 now in 2022. But that's still, out of all the movies that have been made, it's still considered one of the greatest movies. And I'm sure there's reasons why it has dropped, and they're perhaps political and not, don't have anything to do with the quality of the film. But it's definitely one of those films that is considered great and has always been considered great.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that this film really does, it immerses you in what's going on. Like when I see those maggots, I'm just like,
Oh,
oh my God,
yeah.
I would not eat that. Like you
Yeah.
empathize with these characters like right away.
Oh,
Like it
yeah.
draws you into the
Oh, yeah.
story, despite the fact that it's not telling the story through one person's particular eyes. It's through all of these sailors and just the conditions that they have to go through. And
Yeah.
certainly not uncommon in Russia. And when you're talking about during the time of communism and during World War One and all these stuff, like there were poor conditions. There was, anytime you go to war, it hurts the economy. And yeah, I mean, there's a certain sense of like, yeah, this feels totally real, and this feels
Yeah.
like, when you hear about the depression and different things like that, it's like you see this and this is what you think of. It's like, how can you have people not just live in these inhumane conditions, but they're also on the battlefront, and it's
Hmm.
like these are the people that should be taken care of the best instead of the least. And it's like,
Yeah.
all right, you don't follow orders, like, it's punishment. And in this case, it's the most extreme
Yeah.
form of punishment.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it draws you into the story. It makes you empathize with the characters, and it's so immersive in the way it's told and the way it's shot, the way it uses the close-ups at the appropriate times. It's a craftsman, not just a great movie, but it's a craftsman behind the camera, because there are great movies that don't necessarily have all-time great filmmakers making them. So for me, like
Hmm.
when I think of my favorite films, I don't even think of particular films. I think of like filmmakers, because I know when I watch a Kubrick film that if Kubrick never made 2001, which is my favorite movie of all time, then chances are that maybe my favorite movie of all time would maybe be The Shining. Or maybe if he
Yeah.
didn't make The Shining, it would be Full Metal Jacket. Because sometimes it's not only about a particular film, it's about the craftsman making it. And it doesn't matter what he's making, you just want to see what he did. Whether it's a painter, if you love a painter, you may not just be like, oh, that painter made that one particular painting. You'll find a lot of painters like that, but sometimes there's this painter, like, no matter what they make, you want to see what they're doing because you know they're so good at what they do, whatever subject or material they choose to do, it's going to be all-time great, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. And what you say about getting drawn into the film and really feeling for the characters, and that's exactly what Sergei wanted here, because in a way he was being assigned to make a propaganda film, like make a film about how great we are, celebrate the first revolution. It was the 20th anniversary. We're going to celebrate this, but he wasn't so much interested in that. He wanted to kind of use it to test out his theories of montage, as you were saying. Like he was one of the early film theorists, and he had very strong theories, and so he was really wanting to use editing in this film to sort of make the audience feel for the characters and get a real emotional response. He was. I mean, it's hard for people to look at it now and understand because we're so used to editing and montage and emotional responses. But at the time, it was really cutting edge the way he was editing and creating these sequences, and he was getting audience sympathy, and it really worked. So I think that's hard for people to kind of get their head around, but this was one of the first films to really successfully do that.
Yeah. And he didn't necessarily have like a hugely vast filmography for the time. I mean, he made a lot of films, but during that era, I mean, you had studio directors that would make 30, 40, 50 films, sometimes even more. But he made a lot of really great ones. Ivan the
Hmm.
Terrible, Part 1 and Part 2, Alexander Nevsky. There were a few when before this strike and after this
Yeah,
October. So he made a few really, really good films. And he is such a craftsman. He is, I wouldn't necessarily put him up there with Kubrick, but I would put him up there. It's like some of his better films are some of the better films ever made during his era. And
yeah,
and you can certainly pick not just this, but a few others that are just timeless for any era, you know?
yeah, totally, totally. And he was courted by Hollywood. They brought him out to Hollywood, gave him a contract, paid him a ridiculous amount of money. It wound up not really working out. It didn't happen. But he also went to Mexico and worked on stuff there. But he was recognized as somebody who was really good, and people wanted to sort of bring him in and harness his power. But he wound up kind of going back to the Soviet Union and making those later films you talked about, Alexander Nevsky and Ivan the Terrible. Um, but yeah, he was definitely one of the great filmmakers at that time, and I think a lot of people knew it. A lot of the even Hollywood producers, recognized how great he was.
Mhm. Yeah. And here we have this first sequence kind of just deals with the sailors and the conditions that they have to live by and them just refusing to do it. Here's the
Hmm.
rebellion starting up. And we see what it is, when you're in the armed forces, is there's a certain code of conduct and um, there's harsh consequences if you don't follow it. One, you kind
Yeah,
of understand it because mutinies and rebellions, they can happen a lot when you're talking about wartime conditions because wartime conditions are just by nature, they're not great. You're asking people to not just risk their lives but watch their fellow um their fellow soldiers sometimes get killed or mutilated or or blown in half in right in front of them, and you're saying, no, you're not retreating, you're going back on that front line. And there have been a lot of films that have depicted, how that works, and the consequences of it. And um, one film that comes off the top of my head, right, since we already talked about Kubrick, is Paths of Glory.
Hmm.
And yeah, you just, it's a relatable story in the sense that you don't have to be in the armed forces to understand, like, when you're being forced to do something that just isn't right. And you're powerless because it's a superior, and like, what are
Yeah.
you going to do, but obviously this is, when you're talking, soldiers and death being the consequence, it just takes it to another level.
Yeah. Well, the
And
military.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. And this
Yeah.
sequence is just, I was just going to finish off by saying this
Sure.
sequence is kind of just depicting how that plays out, and sets up the events to come later on. But go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say the military is one place where it's almost kind of like a dictatorship. It's like the guy in charge says what you have to do, and you have no choice. Like it's a very strange system. Because that guy could go crazy. He could not have a clue what's going on, but he's still in charge, and he can still force people to basically die. It is very strange.
Yeah,
And I find this really interesting because all they did was refuse to eat their soup, right?
they're borscht.
Their borscht, yeah. That's all they did. They just didn't eat. And so, I mean, I would think if I was the leader, I would just say, okay, fine. They didn't eat. I mean, that's going to be their problem. They're going to get hungry.
Mhm.
But he's going to like punish these guys severely for not eating.
Yeah. There are other stories that kind of try to balance out, the consequences of a mutiny. Obviously, this is
Mhm.
telling one side of it, and these are certain conditions, but there are other conditions that aren't as extreme as this that can cause mutinies. Mutiny and a bounty is one thing I can think of, where you have
Mhm.
Humphrey Bogart playing the tyrannical, captain or of his ship, and
Yeah.
he just went crazy over strawberries. He's who ate the strawberries?
Yeah.
There were 3 cans of strawberries. Who ate the strawberries? And he wanted to kill people over it. But so there are different sides of it that can be told. And like I said, I can understand both sides of it. I mean, obviously, this is the side that's most sympathetic, empathetic, relatable, however you want to put it, for the common person to look at this. But like I said, I mean, there is always another side to it in certain situations where it's just like, man, that feels a little bit like, you kind of relate to the person doling out the punishment, because honestly, like, if you let, there's certain things, if you just, if you let this go, it may seem like it's a small battle, but losing that battle may open the floodgates to, okay, well, if they're not happy with this and I fold, just think about what else, like, they're not going to be happy with, and like, where does my power go?
Mhm.
It's like,
Yeah.
all right, like, we have orders, like, we have to do this mission, knowing that this mission is going to, have casualties, and it may be a losing mission, and someone of sound mind may be like, listen, like, why are we doing this? Like, half of us are not going to survive this, and is it really worth it? You can't really have that kind of critical thinking with soldiers or with, officers or whatever. There's this actor, I forgot his name, he's the actor that played Spawn, and he was saying, like, he tried out to be an officer or a cop, and they said he was too smart.
Ah.
And he was like, are you kidding me? And he was like, later on, he asked other people that were officers and things like that, and they were like, yeah, if you're too smart, they won't let you because you'll question authority. And they don't need those type of people who will question authority. They want people who are going to follow orders. They don't want people who are going to, like, analyze and 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 think. They need people who are just going to act, and
Yeah.
that's part of, you know the world you're in when you decide to join the military.
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, like I said, I mean, that's why I would never do it, and that's why, listen, they can have as many days as they want. Veterans Day, Fourth of July, like whatever days they want, they can have it. And
Yeah,
sometimes I feel really bad when you'll see like video clips of, people mocking veterans, where it's just like, and I'm not conservative, but a lot of times you'll see this, and it's just like, conservatives, arguing with like young liberals and be like, I went to war for this country, and you don't know the things I seen to give you your freedoms, and like, shut up, old man, and blah blah blah.
yeah,
It's like, yeah, you know what? That guy probably seen some shit, man.
yeah,
He probably seen some
yeah,
shit, and I don't know. It's just a complex subject, when you're talking
yeah,
about stuff like this.
yeah. I remember a few years ago there was a bit of a thing where some of the young people decided that Remembrance Day should not be celebrated because it was glorifying war. And of course, this outraged people who had relatives who died in the war.
Of
I don't
course.
think it's glorifying war. I think it's remembering the people who died. It's not about the leaders who caused the wars. It's about the soldiers on the line who gave their lives. So sort of a wrong-headed way of thinking,
But like I said, I
glorifying
mean,
war.
with these complex matters, I try not to choose a side. I try to, like, not say I'm playing the fence, but I try to look at
Hmm.
it from both points of view, and I can see both points of view. It's like, listen, if there's a war that just kills the economy, and the people who support the war, like, with Bush Jr., where it's just like, man, this is about avenging your dad. This is about oil. This is about a lot of things that's not about we need to go to war.
Hmm.
And it's hard to, when you're so against it, and then you support the veterans, the people who are pro war will use that against you. It's like everything's becomes political. So you almost have to pick a certain stance that, like, what, if it wasn't political, I wouldn't choose a stance. Like, how do you support the soldiers but not support the war? You know?
Yeah,
And then it's like,
yeah,
if you're like, hey, like, I don't support this war. You don't support our troops. Yeah, he doesn't support our troops. Screw those guys. Like, yeah, and it's like, that's not what I'm saying, but they're going to make it that way because they want to push their agenda. So you get caught up in this like whole political thing where it's just like you can't separate them. People won't let
yeah,
you. I think if people had the choice, I think everyone of sound mind, like, I mean, obviously I can't say everyone, but most people would support the troops. But
yeah.
I don't think a lot of people would support war. You know,
No, no.
it's like it's because it's one thing to support war when you're not living in a time of war, but when you are, it's just like, dude, like, this economy, the prices we have to pay for things now, the
Yeah.
consequences of it, the deaths,
Hmm.
and sometimes these people that, like Bush, he's a draft dodger.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know. Like Trump, these people, they don't go to war, but they like, yeah, let's go to war. But
yeah,
not no one they know would, they wouldn't let their kids go. They wouldn't
yeah,
go. But,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely not in favor of war, but I think to not remember the people who died, that's just silly.
yeah, yeah. And again, I'm trying to give them credit, and but who knows what their point of view really was. But
Yeah,
to give them credit, maybe it's just a situation where they're just not supporting war, but they would support the troops. But who
yeah,
knows?
yeah,
When you're talking individual situations like that, micro versus macro type thing. But
yeah.
yeah, this is a very action heavy sequence we're seeing here.
It
And
is, yes.
what's weird is, like, after this, it doesn't really get into many characters after this.
No,
And it doesn't really have a lot of action after this. But my
yeah,
interest in the movie doesn't really go away, you know?
no, 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 not at all. One of the things that always impresses me about it is just the sheer epic scope of it. I mean, you don't often call a movie an epic when it's only 70 2 minutes long. But this really does feel like an epic just because it's so huge. There's just so many people here. It just seems like a massive undertaking to have shot this film, to have made this film at that time, especially. It feels like an epic, even though it's not, by modern standards, it's not very long. But yeah, just watching all the people on the screen, all the moving parts of this, I find it very impressive.
Yeah, what really blew me away is the amount of people they got for this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
Yeah, exactly.
that's what really makes it feel epic. It's not even necessarily, and here we're seeing the one of the characters that is kind of
Yes.
one of the characters we follow.
Yeah. You
Gets
kind of
killed
expect
here,
him to be yeah. You think he's our main character in a way, but yeah, he dies. It's shocking.
after he dies, there's really not anything much in the way of a protagonist in the movie after him.
No. But I guess his death and his body does sort of continue on and kind of perhaps inspire people to action.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's more about the revolution itself than it is about individuals.
Yeah. But yeah, this film is just so, the shot composition, the cinematography, and
Mhm.
coming off the heels of another great film we watched that had a god awful score, a god awful Looney Tune score. The score for
Yes.
this movie is so, so great. It just enhances the film so much. And the fact that it's a silent film, having a good score is really imperative to
Yes.
enjoying the movie, because you're not hearing the dialogue, so the score has to be really good. But coming off the score of Eyes Without a Face, which was a great movie, and you guys should definitely check
Yes.
out the commentary track we did on that. But the score for that movie was just tough. It was tough. The score for
Yeah.
this was just amazing. At least I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. The original score composed by Edmund Meisel, I think. And it's interesting that they actually did that. They composed the score and had an orchestra playing at the premiere. So, I often think about, I don't know, maybe it is common, but I always imagined a lot of silent films, they didn't have a particular score. They just kind of would send it out, and then there would be a pianist or an organist in the theater who would kind of play along. But maybe they did write scores. I don't know. But this one, definitely, they had a big score composed for it. And Sergei, he actually hoped that the score would be rewritten every 20 years because he wanted it to stay relevant to the current day. So they have actually created new scores over the years, but I don't think they've done it in the way he would have wanted to, because they're always, as far as I can tell, they're always basically classical orchestral scores. But if
Well,
you
I
really
should
wanted
say
to be,
then, the score I'm listening to is from the version that was done in 2007, the restored version. So if there are
yeah,
multiple scores, that's the one that I'm referring to.
yeah, well, it could well be the original though that they restored for it. We'd have to double check on that in the end credits maybe, but yeah, I think in a way he probably imagined it should be the popular music of the day, whatever
Keep
that
it
is.
contemporary.
Yeah, but I think that they just kind of have different composers create scores for it, which is fine, but um, perhaps not quite what he had in mind. But yeah, it is a good score, definitely the original.
Yeah. Well, again, I guess I shouldn't speak 2 out of 10 because I don't know if this is the original. But again,
Yeah,
it's a version of the score in the 2007 version.
yeah. Okay, well
Restored version.
yeah, there was a new score. Well, I think that was in 2011. Michael Nyman did a score. So I'm not sure. We'll have to double check on that and see. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's the original score restored.
I wouldn't be surprised if you're wrong, though.
Well, I like to be wrong, as you know. I'm wrong all the time.
You must be a
But
very happy man if you like being wrong.
it's just so easy, to be wrong. You can just do it without any effort. You know,
But I
being
think even
right.
when you try to be right, like it doesn't make a difference.
No, it's just wrong. Um,
But yeah, the cinematography of this is amazing. The shot composition is amazing. It's
yes.
just such a well-crafted film. A
Oh
great
yeah.
looking film. Nothing about it feels small. Everything about it feels epic.
Yeah.
It's immersive. The locations, seeing like real people. Like I don't know how many actors were actually used in the
Yeah.
battle sequence, maybe stuntmen and things like that. But for the most part, it feels like you're watching real people in real situations. And this is the equivalent of like cell phone footage. It almost feels like from 1925 as
Yeah.
opposed to like you know actors playing
Yeah.
scenes out.
Yeah. Well, Sergei, he really liked to use regular people or sort of non-actors. He really liked that. He didn't want to use really experienced actors. And even like the guy who plays our main character who just died, even he, I think he started out, he was a theater guy, like Sergei kind of started in theater. So they probably met doing theater. But his first movies were Sergei's movies, his first movies, Glumov's Diary, which was a short, and then Strike, which was his first feature, and then Battleship Potemkin. And he did go on to do many more films after that, but I think he was really kind of an unknown film actor, more or less, when he started with movies like this.
As brilliant of a filmmaker, film theorist, film theorist, and just historical person in the world of cinema, because cinema was what, like maybe 30 years old when he made this movie. It was a very new medium.
Yeah,
Um, he was definitely a unique looking individual. Uh, and there's always the one image they show of him that makes him look like a racerhead with the crazy hair and the huge eyes, and it looked like he just stuck his hand in a light socket or something. But yeah, definitely an eccentric guy. I always think with these filmmakers, like what type of people they actually are in real life, as much as like you look at their work and you admire them. It's easy to admire someone who's not a contemporary, like
yeah,
you can't see, their social media posts or, cell phone footage of them, having freakouts or, scandals that they were maybe in or not, or certain behaviors that they have that may not age well in today's culture. So there's a lot of different things you kind of, I don't know. At least I do. I kind of always wonder about some of these filmmakers you idolize. In that, would you really think that greatly of them if you were in the time that they were making these films? Because
yeah,
we live in a harsh world, man, and I
yeah,
could definitely see like people clowning on the way he looks. Imagine on
yeah,
Twitter saying like, "Dude, what's up with your hair? Like, you stuck your head in a light socket, man." Uh,
yeah.
like, dude
Well, I
looks
think
like a
there's
racer head.
yeah, I think there's also the whole jealousy thing and the competition as well. You don't want to admire people if you feel they're competing with you and they're going to take your jobs or make better movies than you. But there was
I
a
think there's also a psychological thing as well, where it's like it's easier to say, "Oh, back then things were so much better than they are
yeah,
now," and it's like I think there's a certain, I don't know, it's a human trait or human tendency to always think the past is always better than the present,
yeah,
because it's so easy to find flaw in the present. Like you can like ignore all flaws from things that happened previously, but you can't ignore a flaw of something that someone is currently doing. Like if you look, to be very contemporary, if you're talking about like music, where you're talking about like Puff Daddy or Brother Love, or P Diddy, or Sean Combs, or
hmm,
Sean John, or whatever name he decides to go by, you cannot appreciate his music right now. You will just be
no,
stoned if you appreciate his music, R. Kelly's music,
yeah,
um, Weinstein's films. Like you can't
hmm,
appreciate those things today. But 50 years from now, is
yeah,
anyone going to say, "Oh, like how dare you talk about R. Kelly? Like he's because." today, does anyone call Elvis Presley a pedophile? No. People idolize him. It's easy to ignore stuff like that. Not saying Sergei did anything wrong. I'm not calling
No.
Sergei a degenerate, a pedophile, or anything like that. But I think it's easier to appreciate the past than it is the present. And I kind of like that. I don't want to know certain details. I don't want to not appreciate a film because this guy hated, he was racist, and
Yeah.
or because he was sexist or because he assaulted someone. It's like I'd rather not know and just focus on the art.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. I agree. I think the art has to stand on its own, separately from the artist. So speaking of filmmakers and admiring their contemporaries, there was a filmmaker contemporary of Sergei. So back in 1925, a contemporary filmmaker, Hollywood filmmaker, who said that Battleship Potemkin was his favorite movie. Do you have any idea who that filmmaker might have been?
a filmmaker making films in the silent era that loved it.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh, was John Ford making movies back then or no?
He might have been. He's not the guy who said that.
Oh, I didn't guess
I
John
could be.
Ford. I just asked the question. I'm trying to
Yeah.
do a process of elimination.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Don't
True
don't
enough.
don't use up my guesses for me. Um,
Okay. All right.
I would say Fritz Lang.
No, that's a good guess, but no.
I guess give me
I
one more
can.
guess. Without any clues. So it's not Fritz Lang, it's not him. I would say Cecil B. DeMille.
No, that's another good guess, but it wasn't him. I'll give you
Damn
a
it.
clue. When I was talking about the poll back in 1952, which had Battleship Potemkin as the number one movie, best movie according to these critics, the number two movie on the list was actually by this filmmaker. And came out the same year as Battleship Potemkin, so 1925.
It wasn't
Um,
Birth of the Nation, was it?
no,
Oh,
no, it wasn't Birth of a Nation.
so it couldn't have been him then. The number two film. Was it
Yes, according to these 117.
was it the Joan of Arc?
No, no, another good
Oh.
guess, but no. And I guess I could give you one more, one more clue here. I guess we would call this filmmaker a bit of I guess, a silent clown.
Oh. Okay, because I'm trying to guess the film, and I'm thinking that might lead me to the filmmaker. So that's why I was guessing Joan of Arc and that other stuff. Um,
Right.
the Birth of a Nation. So they would call this filmmaker a clown, you're saying?
Yeah, a
Oh,
silent
is it
clown.
it's is it oh, it has to be one of those comedic filmmakers. There are only two comedic filmmakers at that time. And I have one more guess. Um fuck. There are only two comedy filmmakers around that time. So I will guess um should I guess the movie first to narrow it down, or should I guess the filmmaker? Uh
Uh, well, whichever you feel more comfortable with.
so it's definitely the guy who did Modern Times, right?
It is, yes.
Okay. What the fuck is his name again? Okay, he did Modern Times. He played the tramp character. He had that little mustache.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
what the
yes.
hell is his name?
You're
Charlie
correct.
something? Is it Charlie something?
Yes,
It's
Charlie.
Charlie
Charlie.
Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin.
That's right.
Who's the other
So Charlie
comic
Chaplin
filmmaker I
said
was
this
thinking
was
of? The guy who did all the
Buster
stunts like
Keaton.
Jackie Buster Keaton. I was thinking it had to be,
Buster Keaton.
Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton after you narrowed down the
Yeah,
options for me. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well, the only thing I was
yeah.
thinking with Buster Keaton,
Um,
the reason I thought it was Charlie Chaplin is because Buster Keaton didn't really have a film that we consider the greatest of all time. Charlie Chaplin had like three or four
that's right.
films that could be considered one of the greatest of all time. So
Yes.
without those clues, I'd be
So
lost, though.
yeah. So the one that came out in 1925 and was number 2 on the list, do you know what that would be?
I'm assuming it's not Modern Times. You would have said I already guessed
No,
it.
no,
Um,
no, because that one came out in the 30s. That was a very late period silent film.
yeah. Huh.
Yeah, this is
He
like
did a
peak
few
silent.
movies that could have been considered the greatest. Was it one where he played the tramp character that he's famous
Yes,
for?
yes,
I'm blanking on some of the names of his movies, but I know Charlie Chaplin's made like 3 or 4 movies that are considered like some of the greatest films ever.
yes.
Um, God damn it. I know he played the tramp character so much. What was the
Yeah,
movie that um I'm drawing a blank, man. Fuck.
yeah. It's definitely a movie that people still know today, and you hear the name, and I think I even saw it or parts of it as a kid. Like it's, I think
I
more
know which
famous
one it is
today.
too. It's the one where he's in the snow and he's trying to eat a shoe.
That is the one.
I
Yeah, that is
remember the
correct.
movie. Dude, I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
the movie. I've
yeah,
seen it
yeah,
multiple times. I can't remember the name.
yeah.
He's in the
Yes,
snow, he's in a cabin, he's eating a shoe because he has nothing.
that's
Oh
that's right.
fuck.
Yeah.
I just don't remember the name of the movie, man. I'm sorry. I don't remember the name.
All right, shall I tell you?
Yeah.
Okay, it's The Gold Rush.
Oh man. I've seen that movie
Yeah,
so many times. I can vividly remember scenes in it, but I just couldn't remember the
yeah,
name. He was eating the shoelaces like spaghetti. I remember the whole movie.
yes, yeah. I thought it was significant that that was number 2 on that list. 117 critics came up with, and that's a really loved movie that people really they love it and they remember it, and more so in a way than Battleship Potemkin. I don't think I knew Battleship Potemkin as a kid, but I knew The Gold Rush. And
I think
so for
Battleship
Battleship,
Potemkin is more of a film that like filmmakers, film historians, film
yeah,
lovers. I think I think Gold Rush can be remembered because it's just like, people remember a comedy over a drama. It's more fun watch. It's not it's something that like it's like this in that you don't need the dialogue because it's so much visual gags, but it's just
yeah,
like it's visual gags that people still use.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
totally.
timeless. Yeah.
And you guessed Passion of Joan of Arc. That actually is number 4 on this list that the
That's another great
117
movie.
critics came up with. Yeah.
We did a film from that filmmaker. We did Vampire.
Yes. Yeah,
What
we
was his
did.
name? Carl Dreyer?
Yeah. Carl
Theodore Dreyer?
Theodore Dreyer.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So he came in at number 4. Um, so, there were other filmmakers who may or may not have been contemporary of Sergei. In fact, I would say they weren't contemporary. They're later filmmakers, and they have also said that Battleship Potemkin is on their list of favorite films. Uh, and I'd say one of them is one of your favorite filmmakers.
Stanley
Do you
Kubrick?
have a? No, not Stanley Kubrick, although maybe
Orson
he did.
Welles?
Orson Welles, yeah,
Mm.
Orson Welles placed it on his list of favorites. And there's a
I
couple of
know
more
Orson
modern.
Welles really he loved Stagecoach, and he thought that that French filmmaker was it was between him. He really loved Stagecoach. I think he said was a perfect movie. He watched it a million times before he did Citizen Kane,
Yes,
and he loved John Ford, but he also
yeah,
thought that French filmmaker that did the I'm forgetting his name right now. We did Grand Illusion.
yes, Renoir.
Renoir. I think he said Renoir
Yeah,
was also like one of the greatest filmmakers of all time as well.
yeah, I can believe he would say that. Yeah,
Yeah. Just
totally.
to, just to take a quick pause with the trivia. So
Sure.
this is the scene that's looked at as one of the
Yes.
greatest scenes in the history of cinema. It's a scene that's been redone. I mentioned before with The Untouchables with Brian De Palma, and it's one of the greatest
Yes.
sequences in film history. One of the most memorable sequences in film history. It's it epitomizes the Russian montage theory, or it's just a
Yes.
perfect scene. It's
Yeah.
just great, and the way it's edited, it kind of makes it seem more chaotic than what a wide shot would do, and it really
Yeah.
emphasizes how editing and shot composition can affect a scene. because
Yeah.
it's the editing, is the shot composition that really creates the tension in this scene more so than what's actually going down. To see a wide shot of these soldiers just going down the steps, I don't think would have the impact as much as the chaotic cutting back and forth and
Yes.
emphasizing certain things at certain times in the sequence. The timing of the shots and when they play out, and the shots they choose to make, and the pace of the editing really is its perfection.
Yes. And yeah, if there was one thing that I did know when I was young about Battleship Potemkin, it's this scene. Like I think I may have seen this scene, or at least references to this scene. Um, it is a really famous scene, and interestingly, it's not strictly historical. It's not really a true incident that happened. And it's something that
Are you saying filmmakers use creative licenses while making movies?
well, they do, and Sergei was hired as the director of this film. The writer was a woman named Nina Agazanova or something like that, and she was a little bit older, and she had actually been alive and older during this revolution of 1905, and so she didn't really like Sergei's ideas of sort of he was embellishing the truth. He was coming up with some fictional things, and she talked him down from most of that stuff. But this was one scene that he kind of invented and stayed in the film, and even she agreed later that yeah, it was very effective. Um, and apparently, um, Roger Ebert commented on it, and he said the fact that this was not really there was no massacre on the Odessa steppes, it scarcely diminishes the power of the scene, and it's ironic that he did it so well that today this is often referred to as if it really happened. People think it's a true incident because of this movie, but it's something that Sergei just kind of invented, and it represents what was going on. It's not necessarily a true incident, but it kind of represents the truth of what was happening in a way.
You have to give filmmakers creative license with historical events, and it almost epitomizes his approach to filmmaking and his montage theory in that this doesn't have to be true, but it has to represent the truth in a way.
Yes.
And if it hits on the emotions and it's not manipulating what was actually happening, then it's good enough if it didn't happen. It doesn't, this exact event didn't have to happen, but if it
Mm.
represents what was going on at the time, I think that's more than good enough, because you can't, I mean, it's what, like less than 90 minutes. So you can't tell a full story in that time. You have to figure out a way to manipulate emotions and circumstances to condense it and make people feel all of those things that happened for the length of this event in the length of a movie. And for that, you're going to have to take creative license. As long as it doesn't manipulate what actually was going on at the time, I think you have to give filmmakers that type of license, you know?
Yeah, totally. And
And before you continue, I
yeah,
love this scene here where it just epitomizes, again, his great editing in that cutting in those shots of the lions as if they're in shock that these
yeah,
things are blowing up, where
yeah,
the two have nothing to do with each other. It's only editing that makes it appear that way, but
yeah,
it just it adds so much. And you know, you almost feel like those lines are reacting, those stone lines are reacting to the explosions and all the chaos that's going on, but they're not. But
yeah,
it's just cutting those scenes together just brings you those emotion. And I think the filmmaker that carried this on, his legacy on beyond any other filmmaker, the most would be Hitchcock. Hitchcock was
oh yeah,
big on editing, where it's just like, you
yeah,
know, they would even, he would even say, hey, you take this one shot out of this sequence and it makes no sense, but you get that reaction shot and then suddenly it changes everything. I think there was more craft with Sergei, but certainly Hitchcock did it very much more commercially and much longer. And he really, you know, took it to a more mainstream aspect with his films than Sergei did. But they both use montages hugely in their films. And of course, you have the 80s where it was just montages galore. So,
Yes. Yes. Well, it's interesting because Hitchcock, you could describe as a filmmaker who was contemporary of Sergei, because he also made silent films in England, I'm sure, at this time. So they were kind of at the same time almost inventing the language of cinema, because Hitchcock is sort of known for developing a lot of what we know today as the language of suspense. You know, when we see suspense in movies, a lot of that comes right from what Hitchcock kind of developed, and Sergei was developing a different language, you know, with the montages and all that stuff. So I think that it's an interesting comparison there between the two.
absolutely.
But yeah, you know, I was going to say that the original script for this movie included a lot more events from the 1905 uprising, but they all kind of got cut, and they chose to focus on just the battleship Potemkin, you know, partly for budgetary reasons, but they kind of focused it more instead of trying to portray all the different things that were going on. And though I guess the one big departure was the steps, the Odessa steps, but it was originally going to be even more epic, I guess, and it kind of funneled down to what it is, and probably a good thing, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think he wanted to make like a series of movies, kind of like Ivan the Terrible, where he made part 1 and part 2. I think he wanted to do a series of movies with this as well. But just to again get back into the montage theory and get back into that discussion we were having, where
Yes.
if it makes you feel the emotions of what happened, that's good enough. When I rewatched this prior to us doing this commentary, and again, it's been a long time since I'd seen it, at least a decade, if not longer, is that I remembered certain things. I didn't remember the whole movie. I just remember like the steps, the Odessa steps, and thinking, man, that's where De Palma got that from. And I remember there was some kind of rebellion on the boat, and I remembered at the end where you were going to have this huge showdown, but then they didn't shoot at each other. I'm like, oh wow, like I, my emotions were so high for this big showdown. And you would think when they promise something, but they don't deliver, you're going to be disappointed. But I remember feeling the opposite. I was almost like happier that they didn't fight, because I was thinking like, I don't want these characters to die. They're in the right. You know, it's like, I don't want some kind of tragic end, which probably the reality is there was a tragic end. But I wanted these guys to live. I almost didn't want the battle that was promised, despite the
Yeah.
fact that this would be the only other, this would be like the third act where you'd get like the big action scene. So I just remember
Yeah.
like how great it was that like the ending worked despite not having the big action ending set piece. But the way I remembered it wasn't the way it played out in the movie, which means that like if you can make the people feel the emotions, doesn't matter like what the scene actually is. I just remember the emotions of like, oh my God, here's this big battle. The big battle didn't happen. And it's like, it worked on me. I loved it. But how it played out was not in my mind how it actually played out when I watched it. So sometimes that stuff doesn't matter at all. If the emotions hit,
Yeah.
the emotions hit.
Yeah, for sure. Apparently, Eisenstein, or Sergei, was disappointed when Potemkin failed to get, a huge audience, because, it wasn't really a massive hit at the time. And, the film wound up shocking a lot of people, a lot of audiences, and not so much for the political stuff, but it was the violence and stuff like that they weren't quite used to. But apparently the Nazis actually saw potential in this in terms of how to influence political thought through emotional response. And Goebbels, who was in charge of propaganda for the Nazis, he called Potemkin a marvelous film without equal in the cinema. Anyone who had no firm political conviction could become a Bolshevik after seeing this film. And he actually wanted to get the Germans to make a similar film. But Sergei did not like this, and he wrote an indignant letter to Goebbels and basically said that, their idea of realism did not have any sort of truth or realism to it. But the film was not banned in Nazi Germany, even though some people felt it was kind of a dangerous film. And they prohibited SS members from attending screenings. That was as far as they go.
Yeah, I would say so. You're gonna be like, you're feeding me this shit? No, let's throw Battleship Potemkin on these motherfuckers.
Yeah, it did get banned in some countries, though, including the United States and France for a time.
I can absolutely see why. This is a dangerous film, especially when you talk about how early in cinema it was and how it can rile up emotion so strongly. I could definitely see why it was banned, for sure.
Yeah. Apparently in the UK it was actually banned longer than any other film in British history.
UK is a bunch of weirdos.
Yeah.
The video nasties and all the things they ban, it's just crazy.
Yeah. But so there was one other filmmaker who actually called Battleship Potemkin his favorite movie. And I wouldn't say he was a contemporary of Sergei, but I wouldn't say he was super modern. He's sort of he's a filmmaker who we've actually covered. We've done at least one of his films in the past. Do you have any idea who that might be?
We've done at least one of his films in the past, not necessarily contemporary. I would say Tarkovsky? No, Tarkovsky hated him, didn't he? I think they didn't like each other. Oh, no, I don't. Yeah. No, I think that was a bad guess. I think there was some kind of conflict with him and Tarkovsky as far as storytelling, because their approach to storytelling are like opposite.
Yeah. I could see
that. Tarkovsky wanted longer shots, more interpretation, and Sergei was not about interpretation. He was about, this is how you're going to view it. These are the emotions I want you to feel. Tarkovsky was like, feel whatever you want to feel, I think. So they were kind of the opposites. So a filmmaker we covered that like this.
Yes, more of a Hollywood filmmaker, I guess.
We already talked about Orson Welles, so it's not Orson Welles, right?
It's not Orson Welles. Somebody who was contemporary of Orson Welles.
Jeez. It would have to be a visual filmmaker, no?
Well, it's an interesting thought. I'm not sure. I tend to think of this filmmaker as a little more comical in his approach, but he does do serious things as well.
Was it we haven't covered a Billy Wilder film though, so it could be Billy Wilder.
Well, no, you're wrong. We have done a Billy Wilder film.
Yeah, we did do a Billy Wilder film. We did Sunset Boulevard. Is it Billy Wilder?
It is Billy Wilder. Yes, he actually called it his all-time favorite film.
I just saw a message on my screen saying my IP address is out. I'm hoping that doesn't mean that the internet's about to cut out again.
Well, so far I can hear you. So.
Okay, we only have 6.5 minutes to go. Hopefully my internet doesn't cut out again, because it cut out once on us. So hopefully we can keep this going.
Yes.
So. Yeah, Billy Wilder, huh? I wouldn't think Billy Wilder, because their styles don't really mesh too well. As far as like, I could see like he makes films like that. I don't really remember. Billy Wilder is about actors and the performances of actors. Sergei was more about like visuals and editing and shot composition. So that's interesting.
Yeah. There was also a famous painter who considered Battleship Potemkin to be an inspiration and a catalyst for his work, and especially the Odessa Steppes sequence. He created some art that was kind of based on that. Don't suppose you have any idea who the acclaimed painter would be?
Um, acclaimed painter. Let me think. I don't know that many painters.
No,
Um, I don't know. I don't know.
no,
I only know a
no.
handful of painters.
It's Francis Bacon.
No, I would not know. I would not know
Yeah,
that.
I would never come up with that either. So interesting that this movie was always sort of in the top 10 greatest movies ever made in the famous Sight and Sound list until it dropped to 11. And then just last year or 2 years ago, it dropped much further. Do you have any thoughts as to why that would be? Why would it suddenly drop in
Yeah, of course.
2022?
I would think one is fatigue. I mean, if you're going to keep doing these lists, you don't want to keep putting the same movies on there because as time passes, you recontextualize films you've already seen. One that can do is make you appreciate films that you didn't appreciate as much in the past. And two, it can make you take for granted films that are further in the past. So the more time that goes on, the less appreciation there's going to be for films like this and for films like Citizen Kane,
Mhm.
pioneering films because as people get older, people die out, younger people start moving in, you're going to be like, oh, well, other films do these type of techniques. Why is this film so special? And you'll lose appreciation for like, no, well, when this came out, this is how cinema was at the time, and this is the impact it had. You're going to have less and less people that feel that way. And like I said, with recontextualizing of films and also with newer films, you also want to appreciate films that are come out after this, and they deserve a space in this list as well. Who's to say that No Country for Old Men or There Will Be Blood, or put in whatever great fairly contemporary film you want to think of, that maybe the filmmaker wasn't even born when this movie came out, that have since come out and made great films. So I don't think there's anything wrong with films like these dropping down the list as long as they're still high up there. Because I
Yeah,
sometimes I look at these lists and some of the movies that are on the top greatest films, you're like, what the fuck is this doing on the list still? And it could be just
yeah,
like a hit movie from like the 80s, like a comedy or something like Tootsie. I'm like,
yeah,
Tootsie is still one of the greatest films ever made? Really? It's
yeah,
just like, okay. So, so no, as long as it's still considered a great film, if it gradually drops or if it fluctuates, as long as it's still considered one of the greatest films ever made, I don't think there's any issue with that.
yeah. Well, I wonder if it's going to come back, because I think some people have suggested that this latest list there might be other things going on, like a move to sort of shake things up a little bit. Um, and just as one example, we talked about a while ago the fact that Vertigo dethroned Citizen Kane as the number one film, which it
Jesus
did.
Christ. Yeah.
10 years ago it did, but it's now been dethroned. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a new number one film, and Vertigo is now number two, and Citizen Kane is number three, according to this list. The
The
new
fact that
number one
Vertigo is
film.
even in the top 50 is a disgrace, honestly. And it's not that it's a bad film, but it's not one of the greatest films ever made. And like we've already went over on the other podcasts, it's not
Yes,
even the best Hitchcock film ever made. But go ahead.
yes. So the new number one is a movie that had never been on this list before. So it's not like it slowly came up. It was number 20, and now this came out of nowhere. And this is a film from 1975. It's I'm not even sure if I can say this name right. It's Jean or Jean Dielman, 23 Commerce Quay, 1080 Brussels. That's the English title of this film. It's a Belgium-France co-production, and it's directed by a woman, Chantal Ackerman. So some people have suggested that this was a concerted effort to put a movie directed by a woman on the top of this list. I've never heard of this film before. Have you?
No, and that's one way to get people to ignore your list is do bullshit like that. But this film that we just watched is now wrapping up. We're seeing the end credits
Yes.
here. Any final thoughts?
Well, it's a great film, and like I said, I it's one of those films that I think a lot of people can't fully appreciate. Uh, but it is so influential. It is so important, and it's still a very entertaining film to watch. And at only 72 minutes, it's not a hard film to sit through. It's not like a 3 hour epic, but it is still an epic of sorts. And I highly recommend it. I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, well said. I think I said all my thoughts while we were watching, and watch it. Watch the restored version, if anything. But for Angus
Absolutely.
Combe, this is Sean Weathers. Class dismissed.